Welcome to our new story chapter. Chapter number 9, Early Morning Visit. Author, Charles Pendelton.
A white sanitation truck slowed to a whining halt along an adjacent street, creating an ominous sound, so distinctly pitched, it instilled fear in small unsuspecting animals that were usually confined to their own private quarters. As the garbage truck rolled down the block and stopped, Mr. Bagall, out for a leisurely stroll with his new puppy, walked beside it. Out of nowhere, the truck released a sharp burst of compressed air, startling the high-strung Chihuahua, who darted from it in inexplicable terror. Taking Pixie on the street rather than through the woods was clearly a mistake, as that blast of air, it must have sounded like a dragon hissing fire at the small creature. Scrambling for a way out, he took off like a bullet, almost choking himself in the process. If you take into account that its brain couldn't have been larger than that of a quarter, maybe then one could understand what kind of torment it must have been suffering. From where I stood in my room, it looked like he had a gigantic spider on that leash. And upon thinking that, I immediately shuddered. I do believe that, in all honesty, if it ever got off that leash, it would simply run until it dropped dead somewhere. That's one feisty little bastard, I said aloud, to my surprise, before pulling the outside screen up with much difficulty and sticking my head out. I could see it was going to be a beautiful day. Pete arrived early for a change and slipped in through the back door. I always kept a spare key in the vacant lot beside our house. A rather large area of land that did not belong to us, but considering that it was already there, the least we could do was keep the lawn well trimmed from the previous owner and the cylindrical garden within the center of it all maintained. The mirrored gazing ball that delicately sat inside its aging concrete pedestal was a joy to look at. It was under one of the pink stones that surrounded the globe where the key was hidden. The time read 8:07 when I heard him surreptitiously ascending the staircase. Do my eyes deceive me? Has the afternoon man arrived before 12 o'clock? Ha, you're a barrel of laughs, said Peter wryly. Where we came from, calling someone an afternoon man was sarcasm in its purest form. It meant a person who didn't work. Someone who stayed up all night long and didn't go to bed until the sun peaked. A person who didn't arise until after the stroke of 12 and usually wasn't seen until around 3. I don't think I've ever seen you before 12 o'clock. You're a pisser man, he said in an almost jovial tone. Take a look at what I have here. He then proceeded to remove a record from a folded brown paper bag. It was the new Jethro Tull album. Here, check it out. I picked it up Wednesday in my travels. I went milling around the city and ended up at Venus Records. That place is incredible. I know, whenever I'm in the city, I make it a priority to go there and see what's new. So how is it, compared to the other Tull albums we have in the Grand Collection? I like it better than Stormwatch, but not Songs from the Wood. Is it really that good? It is, once you get used to it. The Broadsword and the Beast. What's this, a satanic album? Because if it is, it's going out the freaking window. Don't be an asshole, man. It's not a satanic album. Shaking his head in disgust. I think we need more air in this room, I said as I nonchalantly pulled up on the lightweight aluminum window screen that always appeared to get stuck for some reason. After further examination, I came to the conclusion that it had to go. Okay, this record is certainly of evil origin and will be undoubtedly destroyed. Now say goodnight, Irene, as I pulled the curtain aside and held the record. Like was a frisbee, Peter contested by screaming. Don't be stupid, it's the last one in the store. I then started laughing. Did you really think I was gonna wing it? I wouldn't put it past you if that's what you mean. He then paused to run his hand through his hair like a comb, and it appeared to me as though he had gotten so flustered that he forgot where he was in the conversation. Carefully, he picked up my lava lamp from atop the wooden radiator cabinet and, with his back turned toward me, began speaking to the inanimate object as if it were a gentle thing that could understand. Anyway, it's not one of those albums that's gonna make you jump up and down. It takes a couple of listens before it starts to grow on you. In other words, it sucks. He spins around quickly. Nah, man, it doesn't fucking suck. slamming his fist down upon my dresser like the Hulk in a heated rage. "Now you're just being a prick. Hey Pete, do you remember when I went to summer school at Farrell? I was just a sophomore back then, but I can vividly remember a group of delinquents on the train playing this really cool album. Guys who I remember seeing at Tottenville High School. I asked them who it was, and they told me it was the Cars. What a strange name for a band, I thought. I then said to myself, I have to get that album. It was only after I bought it that I started to hear every song from that record being played on the radio. To be brutally honest, I would put it right up there on the shelf with The Dark Side of the Moon, Wake of the Flood, and my Rocket to Russia album. The more I think about it, the happier I am. I went, even though I rued the thought of it with all my heart and soul. At least you never got left back, right? No. Did the summer school program help you in any of your studies? I don't know if it helped me, but I started smoking pot that year. The pot helped me, I guess. How so? It made me less pragmatic. I'm not sure I knew at the time what the word pragmatic meant, but I had a pretty good idea, so I figured I'd run with it. Pussy Willow, I said, referring to song 7 on the album. What is he singing about here? A tree. Pete looked at me with an expression of mild disdain. You're joking, right? I'm messing with your head, man, I said, laughing loudly. By the way, where were you yesterday? Yesterday, I was floundering around. I rode my bike to Tottenville and went by the conference house for a while. Then I came back and looked for you, but you weren't around, so I hung out with Paul at his house. We split a 6-pack of Kronborg and talked for a bit. I bought Kronborg yesterday too. Or no, that was Lowenbrau, sorry. I then removed from my box a wonderfully rolled Fluber, as we called it that year, and proceeded to light it. How on earth did you roll it that perfectly? Well, for starters, the weed was slightly moist, so I snipped off what remained of the stems, and then after scrapping next to nothing, I rolled up the buds rather than crumble them. Then I kept it in my drawer for a month. For some odd reason that no one's been able to explain to me, Sinsemilla does not have any seeds. Not even in the buds. How is that even possible? I would later come to learn that it is a highly potent strain of marijuana from female plants that are specially cultivated and kept seedless by preventing pollination in order to induce a high resin content, hence the name, Sinsemilla, that in Spanish simply means seedless. This is excellent, said Peter as he toked away. We passed it around until there was nothing left but a charcoal stem and 2 burned fingertips. The time was now 8:20. Peter turned the white plastic knob on my television set and went past each station until he reached channel 13. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was on, and Fred was talking in television land. Everything seemed to be a-okay from that side of the table, where no one ever gets hurt, and pain is a topic that is never discussed. Without warning, Pete jumps up and does an imitation of Fred Rogers while holding his breath. Speedy delivery, Mr. McFeely, speedy Y delivery. I cannot believe I am watching this, I said in the mechanical voice of R2D2, who was beginning to short-circuit. I really find it hard to believe a full-grown man can act like that, I uttered. Hello, kiddies. Today, we are going to talk about getting high and the dangers of marijuana usage. You really don't want to do any of this stuff because it isn't good for you. I would suggest you all buy a packet of Marlboro cigarettes and enjoy them after school. You sound like the president of a tobacco company, Pete. You sound like Morton Wexler. Who the hell is Morton Wexler? Peter snapped back while trying desperately to regain his composure from all that laughter. I have no idea. Suddenly Fred Rogers began singing that silly song. It's such a good feeling, and neither of us could contain ourselves. Pete now had his hands covering both eyes and could in no way stop laughing. What's wrong with you, Fred? Was all he could muster in a glassy-eyed stupor. So pronounced it seemed he could not catch his breath. After that, Fred waved goodbye to Trolley, and before long, the children's show ended. It was fun being a jerk, and who really cared about the things people think about or the things people do anyway? Life was meant to be enjoyed, and I was doing my damnedest to not let things go awry. Pete turned the dial that made a loud snapping sound as it went around until he found something of interest. The Addams Family had come on, and Morticia was grooming her hair. "Isn't it just lovely, darling?" she thought to herself. "I don't know why," said Peter, "but I just can't get into this show. No matter how many times I see it." "Yeah, I'm with you on that, and I think I know why. It's because Lurch is too despondent. And Cousin It just flutters around without any meaning, uttering complete nonsense that no one of a sound mind could ever process. Everyone in the show understands her except the people viewing. Wednesday's too whiny and Pugslil. Where did they find that kid? In a supermarket aisle looking at the cereal. He belongs on a farm somewhere in Idaho. He's always blowing things up. What's with that? Here's a new train set, Pugsley. Now be a good boy and blow it up for me. Hey Pete, imagine your dad got you this state-of-the-art robot, and you blew its head off with an M80 in the middle of your bedroom. What should the rational response for doing something like that be? Do you think your dad would have been cool like Gomez? I think he'd bludgeoned me to death. And look at Fester. He's always got that frigging light bulb in his goddamn mouth. Need a light, Gomez? Let me just unscrew one from Grandmama's lamp." Peter then began doing his pantomime routine. First, he impersonated his character by unscrewing the imaginary light bulb from an imaginary light source. He then pretended to put the bulb in his mouth, as would a jubilant Fester Addams. Then with his eyes rolled up and his mouth in an O position, he looked like the confused alien that appeared to be having a nervous breakdown in Edvard Munch's painting of 1893 titled The Scream. Soon it was 9 o'clock, and the show had ended. After a seemingly long commercial break, another show was about to air. On 1313 Mockingbird Lane, we came to find the Munsters shuffling about in a timely fashion and distilling mirth. All the cobwebs and antiquated furniture nestled away in the arcane dwelling were now a sanctuary of peace for me to reflect upon. A grand escape, so to speak. I soon found their homestead to be reminiscent of my grandmother's house and began to think of both houses as though there was a direct correlation between them. As my being dissolved into lethargy, my mind was transported to that old black and white Victorian mansion. Pete then staggered to his feet to do an imitation of Herman lumbering in after a hard day's work. In a dry but pleasant voice, he uttered the following phrase, "Lily, I'm home." I don't know how, but he had the science of it down pat, and with that sullen face of his ever-changing, he could impersonate almost anyone to a T. The wind was blowing outside that house like a giant twister was coming, while I felt as calm as a zeppelin floating unhindered in an immeasurable sky. In an anomalous way, it was almost breathtaking. Then the daydreams overshadowed my mind, and I allowed myself to be led by them. As I transcended deeper into the picture, the story unfolded wonderfully. The pictures in my head were more along the line of daydream patterns summoning me to participate with them. As I began to dwell on this, my mind whisked me away. I drifted into the house on a cool breeze rustling through the curtains and settled down amongst the dusty furniture. The only currency I took with me had already been smoked. I was now but a vapor in the midst of time. While the episode continued to air, my mind manufactured dreams, creating new roles for me to partake in. Most of the time, I didn't have any say in the matter. Static soon interrupted the picture, and a brief adjustment would have to be made to the UHF antenna, which was now drooping to one side. After some rearranging of the rabbit ears and positioning of the wire, the picture was back and it was clearer than ever. As I wandered past several strange rooms like a midsummer breeze, I became skeptical as to why I was there in the first place. Finding myself atop the old staircase, I was not surprised to find that under this staircase, no dragon was hiding. That was all a great hoax, but apart from that, everything had been masterfully reproduced, right down to the finest detail. How charming everything looked in a peaceful and dreamlike atmosphere. As I moved about under the spidery stairs, I now felt as though I were being watched by over 1 billion eyes. Creeping ever so gently, I made my way down the ancient, withered steps to the lowest region of the house. Here I discovered a multitude of carefully stored wine bottles preserved in a dank dark corner of the stone-walled cellar. Using my hand, I wiped away years of dust from 2 of the bottles. One I can see is from 1896, but the other is obscured. Wait, I am beginning to see something. No, that's only my reflection. Hold on, there it is, 1902. Many of the bottles had paper labels that were either peeling or flaking from the aging process of time, but still, there were some with glass embossing. In the earlier part of the 19th century, the concept of paper labels wasn't even a fathomed thought in the mind of inventors, so bottles were either embossed with text or they were clear. I then carefully placed the bottle back down on its side, where I found it, scurrying about like a mouse through cold torchlit passageways and into an eerie laboratory. I found everything to be in rather neat and precise order. Beakers filled with red and green liquid were contained in their holders. Several distillation apparatuses, alongside other marvels of ages past, were working in the same manner as things of the present day. There were apothecary beakers emitting a curious white smoke while the spherical conical retorts dripped slowly into a simmering glass pan. The long slender vessels, with downward pointing necks, which appeared to be the most delicately fragile of all laboratory glassware, were now operational and in full swing. Beside an amber-colored graduated flask and a rather interesting-looking round-bottom flask, smoke was building inside a thin pear-shaped separatory funnel. Everything seemed to be awaiting Grandpa's return. A plume of smoke suddenly appears before me. Puff. "What is it, you ask?" spoke the old vampire excitedly. "Why, it's Grandpa. Munster's super growth formula, of course. It'll make anybody 10 times taller, enabling them to conquer any foe at all. No one will ever bother you again. But if I find out you're trying to swindle me, I'll make you 10 times smaller, and watch you get eaten by a hungry aphid. Here, let me show you," exclaims Grandpa enthusiastically as he carefully pours the 2 liquids together. "Now, all you have to do is drink it." Traveling to the upstairs portion of the house, I could now see an extensive library of voluminous books covered in layers of undisturbed dust. All first editions, protected from the elements of time and sun. They are here for your reading pleasure or simply for you to gloat upon at your leisure. Each room tells a story where the past and present meet. Trees sway and bend as the impending storm approaches. Leaves that have pulled away from their branches fly aimlessly in the gusty wind. Suddenly, the air explodes, fulminating in a barrage of pandemonium as the sky crackles and the thunder booms. Follow the orchestral arrangement of tumultuous sounds as it brings forth a torrent of darkness in its heavy pitter-patter. Outside you may hear the rain falling to the sound of 1,000 horses, where tears of victory come streaming down the fragile panes in stride, unabated. Carefully, they tell their own tale of woe. The years are heavily laden with sorrow, but not for you. You hear only hollow echoes within the sanctity of the abode. Am I even watching the show? Am I really here? Vintage decor that has long since vanished in a time frame not our own is perhaps the most beguiling. To capture the very essence of it for all to see. Can it be done? I thought. Is it possible to create another realm of living within the current realm we are all subject to participate in? I suppose if one has the resources and the time. Time, what a cursed thing. It moves by invisible numbers that can always be traced back but can never be traced forward. I then realized that time itself doesn't really change at all. Every season is more or less the same. It is we that have been changing as new ideas come forth. As I got higher, I began to think more and more of that house. I couldn't fathom being endowed with such a magnificent dwelling, one with grand arches atop its roof and high ceilings. A house like that is the equivalent of a town whose population is 1, and you are the sheriff. The pleasures of getting high, I thought, and why is it illegal? It gives the hopeless hope while enabling the blind to see. But for a fleeting moment, we're a terratune in time. During the commercials, we joked around, doing silly impressions and imitating various actors before breaking the seal on a bottle of Jeremiah Weed bourbon liquor to welcome in I Dream of Jeannie. The time read 9:30, and everything was as calm as could be outside. I wasn't into the color scene as much as I was for the black and white shows, so my attention span was limited to about 12 seconds, give or take a few. Together, we threw down a shot in unison, and Peter gave his opinion while pointing up toward Christ in heaven. Nectar of the gods, Pete proclaimed, like Caligula Caesar before the fall of Rome. He then held the glistening shot glass at eye level while conveying an emotion I am still trying to define. Similar to when a person is overcome with joy, the words which have almost escaped from the lips suddenly diminish. The occupant, baffled at his loss for words, realizes there is nothing he can say, and so he continues to admire the jigger of honey-like liquid as though it were a shimmering glass of absinthe, cleverly designed to open his mind. One more, and that's it, I said, like an overpaid actor. Don't be a killjoy. Listen, this is 100 proof, and I don't want you getting sick in the house. There is no way this is 100 proof. Yes way, see for yourself, it's right here on the bottle. Keep thinking like that, and we're both gonna be throwing up. Ain't that something? I thought it was 60, maybe 70 proof tops. After partaking in this splendid drink, I began to feel somewhat propelled into storytelling and laughter. It was time I revealed to Peter the story of how I acquired the bottle. A little anecdote to raise our spirits, so to speak. 3 weeks ago, I felt like taking a stroll, so I left the car in the driveway and began walking, not knowing where I would end up. As fate would have it, I ended up in Greenwich Shopping Plaza. I entered the liquor store and asked them if they had any weed. They all looked at me dumbfounded. I then said, Jeremiah Weed, and they all laughed behind the counter. Why, of course. Straight down, you'll see it on your right. Pete appreciated the story and laughed. Only you would do that. What did you think of that Honeymooners episode last night, Pete? I love that episode. I love it when Ralph gets stuck between the pipes. Do something, Norton. You gotta help me. Norton. Norton. They're playing your song, Ralph. I don't care whose song they're playing, I'm not answering. Sometimes I almost forget that 328 Chauncey Street is a prop. I know, right? Replied Peter ecstatically. It suddenly seemed as though everything was going right today, and I had not a care in the world. Walking into the bathroom, I thought of a song I wrote. It would be easier for me to move the mountains around, for me to break the speed of sound, than it would to hold you in my arms again. If I tried to say how I feel today, I wouldn't lie to you. My voice would tremble too, and you might find that life is terrible. I'd rather live inside in a box, 6 feet long on dirt and rocks, never opening my eyes to face the truth that I've lost you. Could I have another chance to see you smile, to watch you dance, to whisper gently in your ear words of yesteryear? It's hard not to lose faith when the world around you is unbearable. I wish I could awaken from this dream. I've given everything I could. We tried so hard to be understood. It didn't matter in the end. It would be easier for you to extract what's in my mind, to read each sentence line by line, than it would for me to open up my heart again. If only I could just explain, describe every detail of my pain. You might be inclined to believe that I exaggerate. I'd rather be cast out into space, to leave this world without a trace, like a bee outside a hive. In wintertime, if I could dissolve upon a hill, like a mound of honey, decaying still, what would take away my fear? Words of yesteryear. After some time, I Dream of Jeannie ended, and by 10 o'clock I had fallen into a starry haze and became lethargic. Before I could even realize what had happened, another show ended, and the time was approaching 10:30. After more time had elapsed, I thought I heard the telephone ring in the kitchen, so I went downstairs to answer it. My mother is on the other end of the line and has called to say she will be coming home early today. She said, no one better be here when I get home, especially Pete. I told her no one will be here and not to spend the rest of the day thinking about it. The time on the kitchen clock reads 10:57. My parents never liked Peter due to a condition he acquired called obsoblepsia. I believe it stemmed from smoking too much pot, but Pete will deny this. For this minor infraction, my parents would accuse him of either being on drugs or being a thief. In those moments when he succeeded in making direct eye contact, then, as fate would have it, he was way too porciloquent in his speech. After the inevitable phone call, I went back upstairs with 2 glazed long cookies and gave one to Peter. Aren't Pop-Tarts supposed to be heated? He asks with a seemingly blank expression. That was yesterday. Today, it's a cookie, so eat it. Can't I at least have a glass of milk with it? What are you, a cat or something? Just eat it. I surprised myself as I willingly became Ralph Cramden and hastily blurted the words out. Peter laughed at the way it sounded and gobbled up the cookie. After that little treat, we listened to some music on my turntable. It was then I asked Peter a question. What is the best song on the Too Old to Rock 'N' Roll album? I'm gonna have to go with the title cut on that one. What do you think? I think the best song on that album is Strip Cartoon, and it wasn't even put on the record. That's almost like asking someone which member of Pink Floyd sang Have a Cigar. The answer is no one, of course. We each took a few more hits off the ornate bong as we laughed and talked about nonsense. Soon the mooring line slowly loosened itself from around its massive bollard. I then realized there was no longer anything securing me to my sanity. So I began to drift away, this time abased and dejected, for the gloom had set in. Why should I even care about today if tomorrow I may be uprooted? Soon the years will become days, and all whom I know and love will vanish from this earthly place, leaving only me to face the terror. When at last my casket is lowered into the ground, will anyone even remember my name? I wasn't a Beatle, a Picasso, or a famous actor. Whenever I started things, I usually never finished them. And when I did finish them, it seemed they were never done the right way. I just needed to make my existence matter, though I had no idea what I would one day be attempting to achieve. The smoke had blown into the dark corners of my mind, and I became morose. Eventually, I managed to sweep aside the wretched thoughts that manifested despair and concentrate on a day that beckoned me to join it. It's almost 11:30, I balked. Wanna go down and raid the fridge? Don't you remember what happened the last time you did that? Yeah, I remember the scolding and the 20-minute lecture. Now, let's eat. The more we stuffed our faces, the hungrier I became. And the hungrier I became, the more I found myself eating. This continued until the pound of ham and the pound of turkey breast were gone. It's safe to say that when Ramon comes home from work and looks for his cold cuts, he's going to find nothing but head cheese. Soon it was nearing 12, so I went back upstairs. There was a certain book I needed to thumb through before we began our excursion.
Stay tuned to our channel to watch our next series of stories.